Hi, this is Braden Holtby.
Hey, this is Tanner the Bulldozer Bozer.
Hi, this is Brian Burke from Toronto, Ontario.
This is Daryl Sutter.
Hello, everyone. I'm Carly Agro from Sportsnet Central.
This is Jay Onright.
This is Quick Dick coming to you from Tofnell, Saskatchewan.
Hey, everybody. My name is Theo Fleury.
This is Kelly Rudy.
This is Corey Cross.
This is Wade Redden.
This is Jordan Tutu.
My name is Jim Pattison.
Hey, it's Ron McLean, Hockey Night in Canada and Rogers Hometown Hockey, and welcome to the Sean Newman Podcast.
Welcome to the podcast, folks. We got SNP archive episodes back running for 2021. Every second Wednesday is going to be a local community member, their life story here in the Lloydminster or surrounding area, and we're gonna have them coming out every second Wednesday here for all of 2021. Really excited, to hear your guys' take on some of the stories that are going to be slowly shared. Today's is a while back. In the beginning when we first started this, I wasn't sure where this was going, and we picked 10 and went from there. And now with the success in 2020, what we've done is we're gonna do them chronologically. So Ann Campbell today was the first one we did back in April, and we're just going to release them as they were recorded so you guys can kind of listen along to the archive episodes. And I'm excited. This is going back, April isn't that long ago, but geez, in this year, it certainly feels like a lifetime ago. And excited for you guys to hear this and hear what your thoughts are. But before we get to that, let's get to today's episode sponsors. Jen Gilbert and team want you to know, for over 40 years, since 1976, the dedicated realtors of Coldwell Banker, Cityside Realty, have served Lloydminster and the surrounding area. They're passionate about our community, and they pride themselves on giving back through volunteer opportunities and partnerships as often as they can. They know that home is truly where awesomeness happens. Coldwell Banker, Cityside Realty, for everything real estate, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Give Miss Jan a call, 780-875-3343. HSI Group, they're the local oil field burners and combustion experts that can help make sure you have a compliant system working for you. The team also offers security, surveillance, and automation products for residential, commercial, livestock, and agricultural applications. They use technology to give you peace of mind so you can focus on the things that truly matter. Stop in today, 3902 52nd Street, or give them a call, 306-825-6310. Have you seen the SNP billboard across from the UFA? I got to give a huge shout out to Read and Write and the amazing work of Deanna Wandler. I text her at random times and I'm like, hey, I got this idea for X. And then boom, they make it happen. And the billboard is a shining example of that. My quote from Joe Rogan on the wall is another, and they do amazing work. If you're looking for some outdoor signage, make sure you give Deanna Wandler or Read and Write a call today. And if you're wanting to get on this train and sign up for 2021, your business, go to the SeanNewmanPodcast.com in the top right corner, hit the contact button, send me your info, and let's see if we can get hooked up for something here for 2021. A new feature in the episode link. So in the details of each episode, I got my phone number. If you like what I'm doing, or you got some suggestions, maybe you got a guest suggestion, you're like, hey, this guy'd be awesome, shoot me a text, and it comes right to me. I'll get back to you. I look forward to hearing what you guys have to say about the show, and maybe a guest suggestion you have. Now, as I ramble on, let's get to that T-Bar 1 tale of the tape. Originally from Lloydminster, she taught for 23 years, author of 4 children's books, wife, mother of 3, community pillar. I'm talking about Ann Campbell. So buckle up. Here we go. It is April 9th, 2020. I'm joined by Ann Campbell. First want to point out that you got all dolled up for this, and I'm wearing a backwards hat, and that was probably very unprofessional with me. But I'd like to point out I just helped putting 3 kids under 4 down, so I'd like to take some moments to say that you may look better than me, but I'm trying.
Hey, you look great, and when you've got 3 kids under 4, you You have my sympathy.
Well, thank you
Or
very
support.
Well, thank you very much for joining me. This is we're going to see how this goes. It's the first in hopefully a long run of doing some Lloydminster Archives interviews for them. And so we thought we'd start with you. And so what we're going to do is we're going to take a stroll down memory lane, talk a little bit about your life, your parents, your husband, your kids, some things you've learned over life, your career, etc. And so what I want to do is I want to go back all the way to the beginning. And let's talk about your parents a little bit. I know your dad was in the war, and he met your mother just before he left for war, but obviously you know the story, and maybe we could start there.
Well, he came over from England to Canada. He was 18 or 19 years old and was distantly related to J.G. Willard, who was the original owner of the Lloydminster Times. And they brought him over to Lloydminster to work in the newspaper office. So he came over when he was young.
Did he ever talk about the trip coming over, what he had to take, anything like that?
I have a tiny diary that he kept of that week on the ship, and his brother had taken him to the train from their home, and then he had gone to the ship. The first day, I think he was quite excited, and after that, seasickness set in, and it sounded like it was a pretty miserable trip for most of it. Then he got to the East Coast, and he sometimes talked about his train trip out to Lloydminster from the East Coast. And when he got to Lloydminster, J.G. Willard met him, and he stayed with them for several years. The first year, he had no salary except his room and board and a stamp to send a letter back home every week. So that was his salary. He got a job as janitor in the Baptist church, starting the fires for, services and whatever to warm it up and clean it. That was his spending money. That was the first year that he was here. After a few years, he met my mother. They were attending the same church together, and in the, I guess, youth group or young adult group, he met my mother, and they went together for 5 years before they got married. He had gone to Winnipeg to take officers training in the Army and realized that he could be called up any day. And so they decided within 2 weeks to get married. They got married and went back to Winnipeg to wait until he was called up. It was actually about 2 or 3 months before he was called overseas. But when he did go, she was expecting my brother. Didn't know it at the time, but was expecting my brother. So my brother was born while Dad was overseas, and he was 3.5 before Dad saw him or even heard his voice, because during the war there was of course no internet. They didn't even phone long distance like that. The only communication was to send a picture or a letter, which would be censored because he was in intelligence, and they wouldn't want the enemy to get any information about where he was or what he was doing.
If they intercepted it.
Right. So, yeah, they met actually within the church, but went together a long time before they got married. But deciding to get married was in a hurry because they knew that any day he could be leaving.
Did he ever talk about his training or because like he went from working for a printing press or a paper to being on the front lines of the war? Did he ever talk about the lead up to that?
Well, he left the Times I suppose when the war was declared, he must have left, and he went to Winnipeg to take the officers training course. And I don't know how long that was. When he went overseas, he was posted first in England, on the south coast of England, and did several years of intelligence work there. He wasn't in France at first. And then in 1944, he went to France. He wasn't in the Dieppe raid. I'm not, thank goodness. I'm not sure exactly the date that he went to France, but he went to France and then started working their way inward. And it was at Falaise that he was shot.
And this being shot, I was talking to your son Danny about it, and it sounded like, well, I'm going to let you recount the story, but it sounded pretty incredible.
Well, it was really amazing that he lived. He was in charge of a battalion. I'm not sure how many men. I think it was a couple hundred men that were in his battalion.
Unit, yeah.
Unit, I guess, yeah. And he went out to sort of scope out what they were going to do and what was safe to, where it was safe to go. And he was walking down a road, and it was either a bombed out castle or a bombed out church that was at the end of the road, and there was a sniper in one of the turrets there that shot him. And the bullet went in the corner of his eye, came out behind his ear. You could see the black mark behind his ear and a bit of a hole there. Amazingly, he didn't lose his sight in that eye, but he did, of course, lose his hearing. And he lost, he had a lot of damage done to like the nasal passages, and of course he had facial paralysis after that, which was very severe at first. After he finally got home, they sent him back to Winnipeg every couple months for physio, and they did some surgery to tie the nerves from under the tongue to his face, which helped to give him a bit of movement in it. And really was amazing, the recovery he made. He eventually went back to work, but lived all the rest of his life with those injuries, and always had a bit of facial paralysis and a lot of nasal problems because of it.
We talked a little bit about your father and going over to the war and then being shot through the eye back out the ear, which is amazing he survived that. Probably what gets overlooked in that, is, so he's off at war and your mom has a newborn child. Well, and for kids today, where's the FaceTime? Where's the computer? Like, none of that's even remotely close to being invented.
No.
So how did they stay in touch? And how did your mom, I mean, it had to have been tough, right? To have the person you just married gone, you don't know if they're coming back.
No.
On top of that, to have a newborn, maybe, what did your mom say about those times?
Well, it was obviously a really tough 3.5 years. She spent some of that time out at the farm in Greenwood with her parents. They had a farm there. And some of that time she spent with them, at least until after my brother Dennis was born and was a little bit older. And then she moved into Lloyd. But she really struggled with depression during those times. Of course, I'm sure many women did. It was a very difficult time. Fortunately, because he was in the Army, I think she had a bit of financial assistance. I think their wives were provided for that way. I don't think she had a huge financial burden. but the stress of not being able to be in touch with him, not knowing what was happening to him. I don't think she even really knew that he had been wounded until a couple of weeks afterwards, because it came by telegram, but it was quite a while before she knew about it. And she said she knew when she saw the minister driving up in the driveway. She was out at the farm with her parents, and she knew when she saw the minister's car coming down the driveway that there was bad news. She just felt it. But she gained a lot of strength from her friends, from the church, the congregation in the church. I know that the minister and his wife at the time were very good to her. But it was really tough. And at one point, she went through a very deep depression, which was very hard on her. And I'm sure it was very hard on my brother. And he has talked about the night when Dad came back. He was in bed. Of course, he'd never seen Dad before. And, Dad came in, and I think they woke him up. But he said of course, his face was disfigured from the injury. And he had to wear a leather strap around his head with a hook in his mouth some of the time to help, so that he wouldn't lose so much of so he wouldn't get so much paralysis in his face, or at least to help at first. So it was a pretty traumatic experience. He still remembers it. Meeting Dad for the first time.
Was he like excited, or when he saw him and this disfigurement, was he scared?
I think he was more scared, really. I think it was pretty traumatic. Over time, they developed a very close relationship. But I think that first meeting to a 3-year-old would be traumatic. Yeah. And he had never even talked to him yet, really. I mean,
you talk about your mom's depression. Did she ever talk about that at all?
Well, she did a bit. Depression, I think war obviously brings on a lot of that. She struggled with that when Dad came back from the war. They didn't call it PTSD at the time, but
yeah,
certainly he had it. She said, she had to be careful that for a while his nerves were really bad. She had to make sure Dennis didn't shut the door loudly or anything, because it would
trigger him.
Trigger the trauma with him. So he, from time to time, he struggled with that. He never let on, but as I got older and sort of understood that better, I could see from the date that he was wounded or shot, August 16th, 1944, it seemed as though every year, especially when he got really, really old, like into his 80s and 90s, from that August 16th on to Remembrance Day, there was a bit of a shadow in his emotions. And I think that was a bit of a difficult time for him always. It seemed as though after Remembrance Day, he would sort of come out of it again. And not that probably nobody noticed it really, but I think it was always a little bit of a difficult time for him.
Which would make absolute sense.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean,
yeah.
Well, and now you are turning 71?
Yeah.
And in your 71 years, we've had nothing even remotely close, specifically as Canadians, that's even come close to what your father went through, and your mother for that matter.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
What-
The women, the women that were back here, and the families that were back here, but especially the wives, they really are sort of the unsung heroes. What they went
Absolutely.
through, and we really don't give them enough attention. I mean, they're gone now, most of them, but they went through a lot.
Yeah, it's, I really wish I would have stumbled upon this 10 years ago, because when my grandma Dora was alive, all of us kids just begged her to write a book. Just write a book about your stories, because they went through some things that, well, just like you're talking about, right?
Yeah.
Not the war, but they lived through the war, and they were
Yeah.
farming and everything else. And if I would have known what I know now, I would have went back to my 20-year-old self, told them to buy a couple mics, go around and interview some of those people, because
Yeah.
the thing about right now is a lot of them are just gone. They can't tell the
Yes.
stories.
No.
And so I hear what you're saying. What was? Oh, sorry.
An interesting thing one more thing about the war that's an interesting thing about Lloydminster is Bill and John Skinner were two brothers that had the Ford dealership in Lloydminster, and they were very good friends of my mom and dad's. And Bill Skinner was the one that actually took her to the hospital when she went into labor to have my brother, because of course
Nobody else is around.
there was nobody else. But the other interesting thing that he always did was there was a train that came in to Lloyd every morning. I think Mom said it was around 2:30 in the morning. And he went and met that train every night because he had a car. And he went and met the train every night and would, like a taxi, would take the people that got off there to wherever they needed to go. And that was just, one little thing that he couldn't go to war because I think he had a medical condition that he couldn't go, or maybe because of the dealership that they didn't want him to go. But that was one of the things that he did for all those years.
As his way to contribute.
Yeah.
What was growing up in a house with a war veteran and your mother having to go through what she had to go through? What was your childhood like?
Well, Dennis and I were fortunate to grow up with great parents, loving parents, and certainly we were provided for emotionally as well as any other way. But we were really taught to have respect for our country, for the flag. We were taught that we weren't to take for granted our freedom. However, when you're young, that doesn't really, you don't really understand that until you get older. But Remembrance Day, there was absolutely no way that you would miss going to Remembrance Day service. And Dad always impressed upon us that Remembrance Day was not to remember people like him who went to war or even were wounded. It was to remember the people that gave their lives. And he used to be very strong about that it was not to honor people like my dad. It was to honor the people that didn't get to come back. And he was very emphatic about that. But of course, he was always very involved in Remembrance Day services. The other thing, after the war, there was a militia group in Lloydminster, a unit that he was commander of. Now, maybe it was maybe he was captain at that point. But when I was growing up, every Thursday night, it might have been 2 nights a week actually, that they would go down to the armories on 49th Street and, train and have drills. And once in a while, they would have a national drill that would come down. He would get a phone call that, it would have some code blue or Operation Purple or something was going on. And it was for them to practice getting in their uniforms and getting down to the armory and being in a position to direct our community in safety, I guess, if there was an attack of some sort. And those would happen, maybe twice a year. And we sort of all had our own, or I sort of had my own job to do. I had to get the weights to put in the bottom of his pants, and I knew what drawer they were in. And when that came through, that was my job, was to go and get those weights to put in the bottom of his pants. And Mom had things she had to do, and it was to get him out the door as fast as he could, and to get him down to the, so he could get to the armory, and they could organize if there was going to be some kind of emergency.
I gotta ask, weights in his pants?
Well, his army pants, they were, I think they were called putties, that they would wind around the bottom of their legs, and then their pants came halfway legs, and they were sort of balloon, they weren't straight. They were ballooned out or bloused out, and so these weights would be in there to make them weigh down. I don't know. I guess I never really asked him. I just knew that I had to get the weights, and he put them in the bottom of his pant legs to make them stay down. But yeah, that was my job. And
is it interesting to you, or you can remember things like that? And as a kid, I can remember standing and singing "O Canada" at the start of school and things like that, to where we are now, where it isn't a 180. It's just, as time goes on, you kind of forget, and you have less of the older generation that can sit there and go like, listen, this isn't right. We just went through this, now it's, the First World War is over 100 years ago, and the Second World War is, what is that now? 65, 75 years ago, right in that ballpark. And as time marches on, it's so distant, people have almost forgotten what they were fighting for and that kind of thing. But you were young enough to have seen some of the ramifications of what we went through.
Yeah. Like I say, that it was really instilled in us, the respect for what had been done to retain our freedom, and respect for the flag and respect for those in authority over us. An interesting thing, and I think this was probably true of many of the veterans, it was very difficult for them when we changed from the red ensign flag to the maple leaf flag, because they had fought under the red ensign flag.
Oh, really?
And that was for many of them, at least for my dad, it was a very sad day. And looking back, I think it's great that we have our own flag, but they went through so much fighting under that flag, and they they really struggled with that.
It'd be no different than, I mean, we haven't gone through a war, but if tomorrow we change the flag after a lifetime of saluting that flag and standing up for that flag, that'd be very tough.
Yeah, it was very tough. It was very hard on them. And not to say that it wasn't the right thing to do, but it was emotionally very difficult I know for my dad, and I'm sure for many of his Army friends.
How about going to school? Where did you go to school?
Well, I was born in Lloydminster. I've lived here all my life. So I went to school in Lloydminster. Started out in a little kindergarten in a lady's basement. Her name was Mrs. Graham, and kindergarten wasn't in the schools then, so it was in her basement. And then I started in the old Meridian School. Went through.
How big was the school? How many students?
Well, I'm not sure how many students we had. So that's where the city hall is now.
Oh, okay, yeah.
And the front of the city hall that faces the park there was retained so that it looked the same as what the old Meridian School was. I think there were 4 classrooms on each floor, and there were 3 floors. So I guess there were 12 classrooms, and it went from grade 1 to grade 6. Then I went to what was the junior high, which is the E.S. Laird now, and then to the high school, but not to the high school in the building where it is now. I was the last class to spend the full year in the old high school, which then became the Neville Goss School, which I eventually went and taught at as the Neville Goss School. So I had been in high school there and then ended up teaching grade 1 there.
How about discipline? What happened if you got in trouble back in the day?
Oh, well, it was a lot different than now. I mean, the parents absolutely supported the teacher. If you got into trouble and your parents found out, it wasn't gonna be soft pedaled at home. I never really got into a lot. I was too scared to ever get into any trouble, so I never really did that kind of thing. But yeah, discipline was much more strict. Classrooms were much more, well, more old-fashioned, but not to say that the ones aren't great now. It was different, and there was a lot more respect for the people that were in authority over you.
Yeah, well, and that's slowly, it feels quickly, but that's slowly changed.
Yeah.
As time marches on, slowly things have just, I never got disciplined like my father got disciplined, but my kids won't even be remotely close to how I got disciplined.
No.
And every year you go on, it gets a little more, shall we say, liberal?
Yeah.
What did you do for fun back then?
Well, we played outside lots. I only remember one park in the city, and that was, I believe I don't know if it's the Lions or the Kinsman Park that's across from the mall now. That was the only park that I remember where there was, swings and something like that. We spent a lot of time in the winter in the old arena. It was across the street from the Saskatchewan courthouse, and it was cold and natural ice, but we spent hours there, skating on Saturday afternoon or skating in the evenings. Had the old pot-bellied stoves in the skate rooms, and the janitor would keep fire going in there so that you could go in and get warm, because it was I mean, you got cold out there.
But it wasn't an enclosed rink, right? It wasn't an outdoor.
No,
Yeah,
it was an enclosed
yeah.
rink, and that's where we had all the community hockey games, and I used to go. My brother and I would go with Dad to the hockey games. Dad at the time was working for the Lloydminster Times, so he would report the hockey games for them, and so he'd be up in the press box, and I'd be, I don't know, with my girlfriends. You didn't worry about your kids then. I mean, as long as you brought them to the arena and you took them home, nobody worried about what was going to happen in the middle. My brother, he would always sit behind the players' box so that if they broke a stick, he could get a broken stick that might be able to be fixed. So he had one. So that's what he always did. And we lived not too far from there, so we always walked to the hockey game, walked home at night. And something odd that I remember after coming home from a hockey game, Mom would always make us a hot dog. It would be late at night. We'd have these hot dogs. And the other thing that was special about that rink was the concession. And the lady's name that ran it was Mrs. Ferguson. And man, she just was the awesome baker, and you could get the most delicious things in her concession there.
Did you ever ask your mom why a hot dog?
Well, I guess it was easy for her to just boil up on the stove, and gave us something that she thought we needed something substantial to go to sleep on. But I always remember having a hot dog after the hockey games.
And as for the concession, you mentioned fresh baking. Was it fresh baking then in the concession?
Oh, yes. It was.
What stuck out to you from back then?
She made raisin squares that were just to die for. And I could still picture them. I can still taste them. Yeah, it was a great place to go. We spent a lot of time there. In the summertime, we had a cabin at Sandy Beach. Dad bought that when I was 7 years old. And so we spent every summer up there, which we were very fortunate to do. So we would move out there after school finished and move in back to Lloyd in time to start school. My brother taught swimming lessons out there and was a lifeguard for several years. And it was a great place to spend the summer.
I'm going to guess that place has changed just a wee bit.
Yeah. It's funny how concessions in the old, well, I talk about the olden days, in those days were special places. The concession out at Sandy Beach was a gathering place. You went there sometimes in the evening to have coffee, or us kids would go there. You'd get 10 cents a day to spend maybe, and we'd go there to buy a pop. I mean, you could buy a pop for less than 10 cents, I think, then. And it was just a place where you sort of met your friends, or you went to get a treat. And when you were down on the beach, you went there in the afternoon to get a little special something. And it also had a dance hall attached to it. And it was an really old log building. But man, dozens of people used to come there to have dances in that old dance hall. I wasn't old enough to go to them, but we used to go and look in the windows.
Talking about your childhood and knowing with the kind of stories I've heard from your children and then yourself, it seemed like music, specifically piano, was a huge part of maybe your life and your childhood.
Yes. Music has always been a big part of my life, and still is. Brings me a lot of pleasure. So I started taking piano lessons when I was 7 from a man that lived in Lloyd at the time. His name was Lee Broder. And he moved to Edmonton after a few years, and I really didn't want to change teachers, and my parents were willing to take me to Edmonton for the piano lessons. So every second Saturday, my mother drove me to Edmonton for piano lessons. At first, there was a few of us that carpooled, but eventually it was just me that went. And I took piano from him right through until I finished my grade 10, and then I worked on my ARCT with another lady. But I've used my piano in so many ways, lots of it in the church. I played in the church for years for choirs. And now I accompany the seniors choir in Lloydminster. I also do a sing-along time at the Hemstock residence every week with them, just sort of old-time singing, which is really good for them. I play for one of the churches in Lloyd for Sunday services, and I get to play for some other occasions, but I spend a lot of time playing the piano, and I love it.
Well, I don't think you could have picked a better instrument. I was just actually coming back from your house after I dropped the mic off, and I told my daughter as we were driving back that you played the piano, and then I played just a song off YouTube that was piano. And Grandma Newman used to have a player piano that she was just absolutely in love with.
Yeah.
And as kids, she would sit and play the piano for us, and there has never been a better instrument than that.
Yeah.
Danny was telling me a story that you wrote a piece of music for Queen Elizabeth I.
Oh.
Second?
No, for the Queen Mother.
Oh, Queen Mother. Okay.
Yeah. When the Queen Mother died, I wrote a song, sort of a tribute to her. And it's called The Primrose of the Isle, because, of course, primroses are sort of a typical flower in England. And it just talks about this field of flowers, but this special primrose was always sort of admired by everyone, and how kind and lovely it was. She always wore such lovely colors. Like, she always had coats on that were pretty yellow or pretty green, or so yeah, imagination went wild. But yeah, I wrote that song when she died as sort of a tribute to her. And I think I had it performed once at the Lloydminster Music Festival.
Okay.
And I actually sent it, a copy and the CD of it, over to the Queen, and received a reply back. I mean, supposedly she listened to it. I don't know.
Well, still interesting nonetheless. My generation, I would say, and maybe I'm wrong on this, but I would say right around my generation, and I'm 30, turn 34 here very shortly. The royal family doesn't mean nearly as much as what it used to. What are your thoughts on the royal family? Or, you had a dad who fought in the World War, and the tie to Britain was very tight. And as time has gone on, that relationship has changed.
Right. Well, because both my dad and my mother came from Britain. Actually, Mom had come over from England with her family when she was 3 to start farming. But so, I mean, our ties to England were close. We still have some relatives back there. But there's a picture of Dad in England. I'm not sure what year it is, but the South Saskatchewan regiment that he was with had their flag, they called it their colors, made. And he was presenting it to the Queen Mother. And there's a picture of him explaining the symbolism of things in the flag to her. So the royal family was very, very important to him. And he certainly imparted that to us. I think I especially took up on that. I really enjoy watching the royal family. Like I've always gotten up in the middle of the night to watch everybody's weddings. And I used to even get my kids up in the middle of the night to watch their weddings. Not that I made them, but I'm sure they wonder now why they bothered. But I just really enjoy it. And I know they're just an ordinary family, and man, they have tons of problems in their family like everybody else does. But
Yeah, just interesting to me that you'd write a piece of music. So obviously it means a lot to you, and because not everybody's writing a piece of music. Like I can guarantee 99% of Canada didn't write a piece of music. So that's interesting. That's all.
Yeah, I've written music for different times in my life, actually quite a few times. I wrote a song for our wedding, wrote a song for our two oldest boys' weddings. I used to write songs when I was teaching school. If we put on a musical and we needed a song to fill in somewhere, I particularly did two for, got to think of it, the Christmas, what's that Christmas movie about the Grinch?
Oh, the Grinch.
Yeah. So we did that musical once at Neville Goss School when I was teaching there, and I wrote two songs for that. And yeah, I thought they were pretty good.
Well, you got that over me any day of the week. I'm not sitting down, and if there was one instrument I wish, well, there's a couple, but the piano, I tried sitting down once upon a time. I hope some of my children can figure out how to play the piano, because it's a lovely instrument.
It's a lovely instrument, and it's so versatile. You can use it. Like I've used it in teaching, and I've used it in the church. I will spend often an hour every evening just enjoying it myself, just playing.
Did I remember this correct? Your mom used to play the piano for mentally challenged children. Is that correct?
Yes, she did. She eventually taught in the school for mentally challenged children. It was called Parkland School. She taught there for, I think, 11 years. And I might add that for 9 of those 11 years, she did it by herself. She had 11 children in her class and no teacher assistant. It was a tough job. But she got interested in that by going and playing for them once or twice a week. She would go and play for them and do singing with them, just for them in their school. And then the school got so many kids in it, they needed 2 classrooms. And so they ended up hiring her to teach in that school. She never really had teacher training. I think every year they had to advertise for her job, and for 11 years nobody applied for it, and so they would give it to her. And she had a real knack for working with special needs children, and just was excellent at it. She gave those children a lot of years of pleasure.
If there's 2 things I hear now, a common thread coming from you, is I don't know if you had a choice in the matter if you're going to be a teacher or not. Because, between your father being a part of the, was it the school board? Not school board.
Yes, after he left the Times, he was secretary treasurer for the school division.
Thank you.
Yep.
And then your mom working there.
Yep.
And then
my brother is a teacher.
Your brother's a teacher. When you end up going to school, did you have any other thoughts?
Yeah, actually, I thought I wanted to be a nurse when I was growing up. And when I was about 15 or 16, they brought in it was called the Candy Striping Program in Lloydminster, where we used to go and volunteer in the hospitals and the nursing homes and help with the babies and help feed nursing home patients and that. But I saw enough of the nursing world that I knew I didn't want to do that. And when I was 16, I had my own Sunday school class and really enjoyed teaching that and realized that's really what I wanted to do. So ended up teaching kindergarten and grade 1 kids for about 23 years.
Well, my wife teaches grade 1.
Oh.
And I can safely say that takes a special type of person to sit around young kids like that day after day after day. Was that something you were interested in right from the get-go, or had you wanted to teach, I don't know, high school?
No.
No.
No, I was just interested in the little kids. I loved teaching them. It was a very rewarding career.
And you did it for how many years? 23?
23 years I taught. And then I had to quit teaching for medical reasons. And that was when I started getting interested in writing children's stories.
Yes, I'm curious. What books have you written? We on this side of we read to our children every night, always looking for new children's books. So I'm curious.
There'll be one coming. Well, in 2010, I brought out my first book, and this goes back to the story of Dad. When he came over from England, he brought his old teddy bear, which had been given to him when he was 3 years old, and he was in the hospital. He had been scalded. This teddy bear,
sorry, he'd been
scalded.
Scalded.
Scalded. He was sitting on a stool and going to have a bath, and of course, there'd be a little tub on the floor, and his mother had put the hot water in and gone back to get the cold water, and somehow he had fallen in and burnt himself. So he was in the hospital, and she was it was either from somebody that she worked for, but this teddy bear had been thrown out. They didn't want it anymore. And so she cleaned it up and took it to him in the hospital. And so this teddy bear that he had, it's over 100 years old now, but when the school was opened, the Jack Kemp School was opened, he gave it to the school to go in the showcase with his pictures and things. And I felt that the children in that school needed to know the story behind that bear, because it really is a story of going from trash to being a treasure in a cabinet of honor sort of thing. So I wrote the story and called it Just a Bear. First of all, I wrote it actually first in poetry. And then it's funny, publishers aren't, not that it ever was published by a big publisher, but they're not interested in poetry. It's really hard to get a publisher to pick up any kind of poetry. And so I decided I'd try to write it in prose instead. So I rewrote it, and then I ended up publishing it in 2010 as the Just a Bear book. And I got hooked on writing and publishing. Publishing is a very exciting thing to do. It's expensive, but it's very exciting to do and so rewarding. So then I did another book called Just a Party, and then I did Just a Friend, and then I did one called, it's sort of a takeoff on the Three Billy Goats Craft. It's called Snot, Snails, and Salamander Tales. And the last one I did last summer. I brought it out, and it's a revision of the original Just a Bear. Because it was my first book, there were things about it that I wanted to change in the way I had written it. I thought it was too long, and there were things that I thought were redundant that could be taken out. So I redid it, and so it's basically the same story, but it's called Just a Bear and His Forever Friend. And it's the story about my dad and his teddy bear.
So is the bear sitting in Jack Kemp School then?
The real bear is sitting in Jack Kemp School. And I mean, it's threadbare. it had lost its leg, and before they put it in the school, they had a new leg made for it. Literally, like mom and dad had a new leg made for it. And yeah, it's, and obviously before the time of when they would be manufactured, it was obviously homemade because, its ears, 2 ears are sort of different, and one arm is longer than the other. And it's pretty threadbare, but he's got quite a story behind him. And it's a great place for him to be.
It kind of makes me want to go to next time I'm going through Jack Camp School. Heck, next time I drive by it, I'm probably going to have to poke my head in.
Yeah,
walk up to
it's right inside the door.
Yeah, that's cool. That's really cool. I'll look for, I'll have to bug you about a book after this.
Yeah, for sure.
The other thing, aside from school, the other thing I hear a lot is your family, religion played a huge part around the church. Kim had said how involved with music at the church. He recalls one Sunday morning, mom playing the piano, grandma and grandpa Kemp in the congregation singing, grandma Campbell singing in the quartet at the podium, dad in the choir, and grandpa Campbell beside me in the congregation with Uncle Harley. And grandpa Campbell was singing along with tears running down his cheeks, seeing his family. It must have been a pretty special moment for him. And
Wow.
I read that and I was like, holy man, right? Like that's the entire family tied into, something that obviously has played a very big part in your guys' family.
Right. Yeah. And it actually goes back to my grandparents, Charlie and Annie White, who lived in Lloydminster. He worked for Nelson Lumber. Well, he was a farmer out at Greenwood until he retired, and then he spent a bit of time working at Nelson Lumber. But they had a very strong faith. My grandma White had something happen to her when she was about 30 years old. They had done some kind of a test to do with x-rays, but of course it was very old-fashioned in those days, and it had burnt her throat and her chest so that she had something blocking her throat. And from that time on, she was never able to eat anything that hadn't been put through a strainer so that it was just like a very fine mush. And she lived to be 83 like that.
Wow.
Yeah. They had a very strong faith, and, came over from England and started a farm, and really, I don't think he knew much about farming. He had to sort of learn it trial and error. And faith played a very huge part in their lives, and was passed on, of course, to my mom, and my parents passed it on to us. Church was a big part of our lives, and also of my husband's life. So our kids grew up with both sets of grandparents in the same church and being very involved. My Rob's mother was the organist for, I don't know, about 40 years. I played the piano for years. We sang in the choir, and music was a big part of it. And our faith is, we've had some ups and downs in our lives, and I wouldn't have wanted to go through them without my faith in God and Jesus Christ, and the strength that has brought us.
We always talk about the good parts of life. You mentioned some of the downs. What, in your time, would have been some of the toughest moments in life that you've had to work your way through?
Well, not being able to continue my teaching career was a tough one for a while, but I've come to realize that however difficult things are, there's always something good that comes out of it. and it's hard to see at the time, and sometimes you don't see it until years later. But I wouldn't have gotten into writing children's books had I kept teaching all those years, because I just wouldn't have had time. And that has brought me a lot of pleasure, and has been a very rewarding, not rewarding financially, but rewarding in other ways. I have really enjoyed doing it. But we've had other struggles. I had breast cancer. Both of my daughters-in-law have had breast cancer at a young age. They were, and those times you sort of pull together, but I find I really draw on my faith in those times. And like I say, it's hard to see when these things happen, but somewhere down the line, you see something good that happened because of it. Doesn't mean that it was a good thing to go through, and doesn't mean that life is rosy afterwards, but there is something. It's a friend that you made, or a change that made a change in your life somehow that has turned out good.
You mentioned not being able to teach because of a condition. May I ask what the condition is that took you away from teaching?
Yeah, it was mental depression and anxiety disorder that had developed, and I had to step out of teaching. It was very difficult to do, but as I said before, when I look back on it now, there are good things that have come out of my life because of that. And so I have to look at that and take it that way. And I did go back to teaching for a short time, and then I got breast cancer. And that sort of put me back into another depression, and it took me a while to get out of that. And I just decided I was best not to try to go back to that. And it was soon after that I thought I would try writing children's stories.
Well, I appreciate you sharing. I as you talk about it, I found myself curious on what had taken you away from something you obviously love, and now you found children's books. But I was curious what the gap was there. So I appreciate you really sharing that. I think it definitely fills in the story a little bit. I've talked a lot about your family, your parents. I haven't mentioned your husband yet, and I got to sit down with my father and do some of this. And, I was talking with, once again, Danny, and he goes, I don't know if I ever really know how they met. And I think it's, as children, I don't know if it's whether or not we don't care or we don't listen, or maybe a little bit of both at times. But how did you meet your husband?
Well, our parents sort of knew each other way back when we were really young, but they lived down in southern Saskatchewan on a farm. When he was 8 years old, they moved to Lloydminster from the farm, and they became involved in the Baptist church, the same as my mom and dad were. So we were family friends, and often had Easter dinner together, or spent times together like that as two families. And we grew up in the church, both of us singing in the choir. I'm sure it's hard for people to imagine Rob singing in the choir, but he did. He's got a nice bass voice. Of course, I was involved with the piano a lot. So we grew up in the church together, and actually started going out together when we were 16. So you can't poo-poo the idea of puppy love too much, because 55 years later, we're still in love.
How did he ask you to go on your first date? Where did he take you on your first date?
It was after church one Sunday morning, and he asked me if I wanted to go for a car ride that afternoon in his brother's Volkswagen. So we went out to Sandy Beach. To Mom and Dad's cabin, well, in the beach. Came back into town, and then went, of course, there was church Sunday night too. So we went to church Sunday night and came in hand and sat together. And well, that was the talk of the church that night, I guess. But so we went together for 5 years and married. And
how did he ask you to marry him?
Well, it was just one of those things that we both knew that that's what we wanted to do, but it is a kind of a funny story that, my dad was kind of old fashioned in that way. And Rob knew that Dad wouldn't think much of it if he gave me a diamond ring without him going and asking him if it was okay. So the first night, he went to the door, and Mom and I were out at the cabin at Sandy Beach, and he went to the door and he knocked on the door, and there was no answer. And he said he was so relieved he could just walk away. The next night he went to the door and knocked, and then he heard the dog bark and Dad's footsteps coming to the door. And he said he nearly died. But anyway, he talked to Dad and it was fine. So we went to Saskatoon and bought a diamond and got engaged by the Besborough Hotel. And then in 1970 we were married.
He took you to buy the diamond. So that did he come out to Sandy Beach after and say, I talked to your dad, we're getting married?
Yeah. He came out to Sandy Beach and said he talked to Dad, and Dad said, yes, that was okay. And with his blessing. So a few days after that, we went to Saskatoon together. We went and picked it out together in Saskatoon, and then we had to wait while the guy sized it. And I remember going to a store, and Rob was so worried that the guy would change it for a cheaper diamond while we were waiting to get it sized.
Where did you get married?
We got married in the Baptist Church in Lloydminster, not the Baptist Church now, but the old Baptist Church, which is over across from the men's shelter. We got married there, and Rob was working for Shortell's Auto Body at the time, and I was teaching school out at Kitscoty. I started teaching school out at Kitscoty, taught there for 13 years before I started teaching in Lloydminster. Yeah.
What did you do for your honeymoon?
Oh, we went to Los Angeles. We were young enough. We were both 21, had just turned 21, which, nowadays seems young to get married, but I would do it all over again exactly the same way. We flew to Los Angeles, and we could fly standby because we were young enough. So we went there, and Rob had an aunt and uncle that lived in Los Angeles in a lovely house. And so we stayed with them, and we had our own bedroom. We had our own, his and hers bathroom, and it was lovely. They gave us their Cadillac car to drive around in, and we had a great honeymoon, and it was pretty cheap because we really didn't have much money to spend on it, but it was a great time.
What did you do in LA?
Oh, we went to, Disneyland, and we went to Knott's Berry Farm and went to the beach and got terribly sunburned. Oh, just terrible. One of the worst sunburns we've ever had. Yeah, just, the touristy things. We neither of us had ever been there before. And just
Does that mean you're coming up on 50 years of being married together?
Yeah.
This year.
Summer.
This summer.
year.
Well,
Yeah.
first off, congratulations. That
Well, thank
an
you.
early congratulations.
Thank
That
you.
that's an accomplishment.
It is.
How have you guys, once you're married, if there's one thing you learn very quick, or, whether that's very quick as 2 months or 2 years or whatever it is, marriage isn't easy. It takes work. How have you guys made marriage work for you? How have you lasted 50 years? Because, I mean, you're in a day and age now, and I mean, maybe you've seen it go through, I'm sure, friends and colleagues, but divorce is all over the place.
Right.
How have you guys made coming up on 50 years work?
Well, I think there's a few things. I think one thing that both of us have always been very careful. We are never critical of each other in other people's presence. And if we ever say anything to each other that would be along that line, it would be done lovingly and gently. And I think a lot of people are just so quick to be harsh in a relationship, and that hurts. The other thing that I think is really important is that you thank each other for everything. Like, we thank each other for everything. If he's a great cook and he makes a lot of our suppers, I would never get up from the table without thanking him for that. And if he helps me with the dishes, I thank him for it. Like, it doesn't matter how small it is, but I think in our civilization, we take so many things for granted like that. And the other thing is, marriage is one thing where math doesn't work. If you're both giving 50%, it should equal 100%, but it doesn't. You both have to give 100% to a marriage, or it will not work. And there are times when I have not been well enough physically or mentally to do my share, and Rob has had to give far more than me. There are times when you have to be willing to give everything you've got and not be looking to get an even amount back. And I think that's one thing in marriage that's so important, but I don't think very many couples see it that way.
That's very good advice.
Well, I don't know. I think those are some of the things that have worked for us, and we've had a wonderful life together, and I would do it all exactly the same. I would get married that young. I would have our kids that young, because I think, you've got the energy for them, and then you're not so old when you go to be grandparents. It's grandchildren are wonderful, and I'm glad we were as young as we were when they were born, and we still have little grandchildren in our family. So, but we've enjoyed having our older grandchildren grow up. We've had lots to do with them and looked after them lots, and love them all dearly.
Let's talk children. How did you adjust to raising children? Because I don't care who you are, nothing ever can prepare you for having children of your own.
Right. Yeah. Children are wonderful to have, but it takes a lot of work, as you are obviously finding out, to have children, and especially when they're young, and the physical work becomes less maybe once they get older, but you never stop worrying about your kids. About you always want life to go well for your kids, and it just doesn't always go. It's not a perfect world, so life doesn't always go perfectly for our kids or our grandkids, and it's just hard as a grandparent and as a parent. You just want the best for them all. But we were very fortunate when our kids were young, because we lived in the same city as both of our parents. So we had the support of both my mom and dad and Rob's mom and dad in helping to care for the kids and run them around, because I was very busy. I was teaching and involved in a lot of music stuff, and I've always been involved in a lot of committees and boards and stuff, which I really enjoy. So we really benefited a lot from being near our parents.
What were some of the lessons you tried to instill in your kids?
Well, I think one of the things that our kids learned, they were often around their grandparents. We spent a lot of time with them, and my mother had tinnitus very badly, ringing in her ears, and to the point where it made her very deaf. But to her, it was like having a phone ringing in your head all the time. And sometimes it was almost that loud. So the kids had to really learn when they were with them to be quiet, because she just could not handle any kind of rambunctious noise. And they got very good at it. They were very good about being quiet and only speaking, one person at a time, or not being silly around her, because she couldn't handle the stress of the noise in her head with a lot of noise that the kids would be making. So they were very good about it. I think we tried to teach them to be very respectful of elderly people and people in authority over them. And, they always attended church with us, and were involved in youth groups and kids clubs and stuff like that.
How about, I talk about it all the time now, because, in the last, what has it been, the last year, weed has become, or marijuana has become legal. Back then it would have been a little different, but at the same time, as a young parent now, I worry for the choices down the road I won't be there to make for them, if that makes sense, right? You're going to have to instill things in them, so when that choice comes, they make the right choice, essentially. Right. As a parent, in your early years, maybe even into their teens, was there something you worried about? Like, how can I don't know, not stop this, because that's, impossible to do. But were there things you worried about?
Well, I guess we did worry about them. We didn't have to worry a lot about them getting involved with the wrong crowd. They had some great friends that are still their friends till today. But I think a couple things. Their friends came to our place a lot. So it was a place where they hung out with their friends a lot. And so we got to know them. And in getting to know them, their friends developed an amount of respect for us. And I think because of that, sort of respected our rules. And we tried to be pretty reasonable with the boys. I don't think we certainly weren't the most strict people in the world. We tried to leave them to use their own judgment to a point. And I think they respected that. And I found that when I was growing up, I remember asking to go to a high school party, a bush party, when I was in high school. And no, sorry, it wasn't a bush party, but it was a party somewhere. And Mom knew that there would be alcohol involved in it. And she said, well, she really didn't want me to go, but it was up to me. Well, there was no way I was going to go. I had enough respect for her to know that if that's what she felt, I wasn't going to go. And I think we sort of instilled that in the boys. The other thing is you really need to communicate with them. And we would try to spend lots of time just sitting around the kitchen. They might be sitting on the counter and just chatting about their friends and what their day was. But I think to keep those channels of communication open with them. And beyond that, and you can teach them morals, and beyond that, you have to trust them to make good decisions.
Talking about Lloyd, switching from kids over to the city of Lloyd, what has been some of the biggest things you've noticed in the city over the last 50 years, 60 years?
Well, I think the biggest change is it has just grown so much. I remember I was about 10 years old when it became a city. And I remember that time, I think it grew to a size of 10,000, and then we were able to call ourselves a city. But it has grown so incredibly since then. Just for example, the end of town on the west side was where the Dairy Queen is now. That was a Shell station, and other than Husky truck stop, but there was not much out
Past there. Yeah.
Past there. And the other thing that a childhood memory of mine is we had no cement sidewalks. They were all the boardwalks, made of boards. And if you rode your bike on them, it made that ticking sound.
I got to be honest, until you just said that, I didn't clue into that. Boardwalk. Geez. It's like a light bulb just went off my head. Okay, carry on. So every street was a boardwalk then? Or only certain streets had it?
Oh, I think all of them. Maybe downtown, right downtown, like by the old co-op building, would have been cement sidewalks. But like from my house, which was just east of the old co-op building, the residential sidewalks were all made of boards. They weren't cement. They were all boardwalks. But it was really neat when you rode your bike down because it just made that rat-a-tat-tat sound. However, in those days, you weren't supposed to ride your bike on the sidewalk. You could get in trouble for doing that. That was for people to walk on, because people walked you walked to work, you walked to school, you walked everywhere a lot of the time. So, and I remember getting into trouble for riding my bike on the sidewalk instead of on the road.
Do you remember when they switched out the boardwalks? And was that a glorious day or a sad day?
Well, I guess it happened gradually it happened gradually. By the time I was in junior high, I think the ones by my house were cement then. So, I guess they would switch them out as they sort of could or needed to repair them or whatever. They would start putting the cement ones in. But when I was a child, they were mostly boardwalks.
How about one of your sons, and I'm forgetting which one now, said you used to meet with your mother and your mother-in-law for coffee every morning. And he said he almost went all the time or sometimes, and he had Jell-O, is what he remembers. What is it about the co-op? And I assume that must have been a very special time for you.
Well, it was actually in the afternoon, and it wasn't the co-op. At one time, they were both working in the mall.
Oh, okay.
And that was when Smitty's was in the mall, and so I was never very good at staying home all day. So I would take whichever little one I had and go and meet both of them when they went for their coffee break, and we'd go to Smitty's for coffee. Or after they retired, we went up to the Fisher's store. I don't know if you remember Fisher's store at all.
Where would Fisher's store be?
Well, that's where Service Credit Union is now, the Atrium Center.
Okay.
That was, well, Fisher's had a store they had a store before that, but that was their last location, and they built that store. It was huge, and it was 2 floors of beautiful department store, and they had a great cafeteria in there. And I forget the name of the lady now, but she made the most wonderful cinnamon buns, and everybody sort of always remembered the cinnamon buns up at Fisher's cafeteria. But I would meet the 2 grandmas up there it was probably Danny that you were thinking of that was little at that time.
At that time.
And we would, so, that was a big influence on their, spending some time every day with their grandmas. That rubs off on kids.
How about after your mom passed away, you and your husband, along with your dad, traveled a fair bit?
Yes, we did.
Whereabouts did you go? And I assume that was another special time.
It was. We had a couple of years of really nice traveling with him. He enjoyed traveling and wasn't able to for several years because Mom's health wasn't good enough. So after Mom passed away, then he was in really good health, and he was about 89 years old, but still in really good shape. And he took us on a couple of cruises in the Caribbean. We went to a couple cruises in the Caribbean. We went to Alaska.
Okay.
But then one of the really special trips we went on with him was to England. Rob and I went with him back to see his family, and we saw the place where he was born and the schools that he went to. We also spent some time up in Scotland, and we went over to France, to Dieppe. And that was very interesting to go and see Dieppe with him. Interestingly enough, on the way back from Dieppe to the Channel, we came across, we also stopped at a couple of war cemeteries where men from his division had been buried, and he found one of his close friends that had been buried there. He'd never found his grave before, but we found that. But on the way back, we came across a World War II museum in France, and we stopped at it thinking, what a great time to go through this museum when we've got Dad there with us to explain this. But the mannequins dressed in the Nazi uniforms and things were so upsetting to him. We just had to get him out of there. It brought back too many memories, and what we thought would be very interesting for him and us proved very
completely opposite.
Complete opposite. Yeah.
How about volunteering around Lloyd? I see a smile on your face, so I assume there's some memories there.
Yeah, I love to volunteer. I I really enjoy being involved with boards and associations, but I also really enjoy volunteering a lot with my music. I've been involved with the Music Festival Association and the Cancer Board, and the Archives Board. I'm very involved now with the Legacy Association, and I volunteer as a pianist for the choir that we have there, which is really, really fun to do. We have a great choir, and we have a great leader, Eva Miller, who directs us. I also really enjoy times that I spend over at the Hemstock Residence playing for the seniors over there to sing. It's just really fun to listen to them do that. And one thing that stands out in my mind there is there's one lady there. Of course, lots of them are using their walkers, and she'll come down partway through, and just it might be a dance rhythm or something. And before she sits down at the table to join us, she just sort of dances around with her walker. It brings them a lot of pleasure. It brings me a lot of pleasure to do that with them.
And that's pretty cool. Well, where do I want to go here? I want to know about politics. If you followed it, if you've seen a lot of people come and go through this country, did you guys pay any attention to politics?
I sort of like to pay attention to it. My husband's not very interested in it, but but I do. Yeah, my dad influenced me a lot that way too. He was always very worried about us going too far down a liberal path. And I don't mean liberal by the Liberal Party so much as just relaxing our ideals and goals and standards for what we believe in and how we want our country to go and how we want our kids to be raised. And I sort of feel the same way, and because he's told me about, and since he's died, actually I've done some reading about the war, and I realize now how the people, say in France during the occupation, their privacy was so hard to keep, and if somebody knew what they were doing that didn't go along with what the rules were, how they were persecuted or killed. And I see what we do with technology today, and how, for example, I mean, my one son can see where Danny is just on his phone. We can track people. It's very easy. It would be very easy to lose our privacy in this world. And I was involved a little bit with the conservative sort of board for a few years. I enjoyed that, but I don't know a lot about it, but I enjoy following politics, and I can get pretty riled up about it.
What do you think of what we're currently going through? My brother and I have started a weekly exactly this. Just sit down to talk about. It's kind of like, instead of having a journal like your father did on the boat, we have a conversation. We record it because I feel like 20 years, 30 years down the road, my children are going to go, well, I wonder what was that like? And they can go back and hear it firsthand. And one of the reasons I've been so passionate about trying to get these recordings done is in my lifetime, and my father is now turning 64, and he says in his lifetime, this is the most unique time he's ever been a part of. And for me, it certainly is that. And I don't mean unique in the sense of a fun time. It's very different. I don't know if hard is the right word, because it's not like we're going to war or anything.
No.
We're stuck in our houses, isolated, but people are, worried about financial security at this point. Lots of people out of work. Everybody is a little bit stressed, about this COVID-19 and how it could possibly affect their loved ones and stuff like that. I thought maybe it'd be interesting to hear from your perspective how you view what's going on right now.
Well, I don't know. It's hard to know what to think about this. When this first started coming down about a month ago, and we were going to be going into, staying in our homes except to go out for essentials, I just thought it was nuts. But I don't think I understood the importance of it at first. I think I do now, but I am really worried about the effect this is going to have on our country economically. There are so many businesses that I'm afraid may not come back from this. And can we really hand out money to everybody? It's going to take our kids and our grandkids are going to be burdened with this. And I really worry about the economic part of it. It's taught us or it certainly taught me anyway, to value friendships and the freedom of being able to get together with a friend and to get together with friends. I have a group of ladies that I meet for coffee almost every morning, and that is one of the things I miss the most, is just getting together with my friends. But and I think people in our generation and older, I think we tend to allow ourselves to take more of a risk than what younger generations do. We've driven around with our kids not in seatbelts or car seats, or, when you went to slow down, you stuck your arm across them to keep them from, which was not good, but we've, especially our parents, lived through riskier time, risky situations. And I think they were used to having to live more at risk than what younger generations are now. And I think I maybe shouldn't look at it that way, but I kind of do, that we don't live in a perfect world, and we can't keep it perfect. But I don't want to come across as sounding as though we've done the wrong thing, because I don't think we have. But I really worry that if this goes on for very much longer, our country won't be able to come back economically.
Yeah, the repercussions of how far we keep going. And I mean, right now the COVID-19 is one thing, the oil price is a different thing.
Yeah.
Right? Like it's very...
Out here we're dealing with more than the COVID-19.
Yeah.
And my friends down east don't seem to know that or understand it.
If you could go back to your 20-year-old self and give him give her one piece of advice, what would it be?
Oh boy. um, boy, I think to spend as much time as you can with your family and your kids and your grandkids and your parents that you love, but also to ask them things. I mean, there are things now I wish I could ask mom and dad, and we often say, oh, I wonder about something or other. We wish we had asked them more. And I think that's, spend time with the people that you love and ask them about their past, because even though you're young and you're not really interested in it right now, you may be one day when you're older. You might wish you knew more about it. And yeah, I think just that kind of thing is really important.
What are one of the questions you wish you could ask your parents?
I would like to ask Dad more about his time from when he was wounded until he got back, and his recuperation time. That was just something we never really talked about much. What I do know, I know from Mom. But I wish I had asked him more about that now. We do have as I mentioned to you in that email, we do have a 3-hour video interview of him that I need to get updated so it doesn't get lost.
Absolutely, you should.
Yeah.
Looking back, what was your favorite decade so far?
Oh, I think probably our first 10 years of marriage.
So the 70s.
The 70s.
Okay.
It was a very busy time in our lives, but we had both our 2 oldest sons. No, Danny wasn't born in that decade, but we had great times as family. We also built a house during that time, and that was exciting to build your own house and move into it. And I was teaching kindergarten kids and involved with music and the church and grandparents. It was those are great years. And our parents were all healthy at that time. We weren't seeing them suffer with any illnesses or anything. Those were great years.
Who is the biggest star? Could be movies, music, you name it, sports, that when they came about, you remember being like, wow, like whatever it is.
I never was one to watch a lot of movies, but and I don't even remember the guy's name that played in it, but it was a movie called To Sir with Love. I can't remember the guy's name.
To Serve with Love?
No, To Sir. To Sir with Love, SIR. And it was about a high school teacher teaching in the Bronx in New York with kids that were really from
Starred
Tough-
Sidney Poitier and
Yeah, Sidney
Christian
Poitier.
Roberts, Judy Geese, and Susie Kendall.
Sidney Poitier.
Okay.
And I had just gone to teachers college, just started teachers college. And I remember going with Rob, because we were going together then. I remember going with Rob to that movie. And that just solidified in my mind that I wanted to be a teacher. How much those kids needed him.
That movie was brought out in 1967, it says.
Oh, yeah, that's the year I went.
Well, there you go.
Yeah.
What was your favorite book? As a writer, I assume you have one, or you may list a couple if you prefer.
It's funny. As a writer, you think that I would have read lots of books all my life, and as a kid, I didn't. I was so busy practicing piano, basically, with my schoolwork and practicing, and I used to teach a little bit of piano, that I really didn't have time to read much. So I've really gotten to enjoy reading it the last 20 years, I guess. I think the book that I think is my favorite is called The Nightingale by Kristen Hanna. It's a story of two sisters in France during the occupation, and how one stayed at home because she had a son or daughter. Son, I can't remember. But the other sister was kind of a rebellious kind of a person, and she got involved with the underground. It's an amazing book, and I know it's not really a true story, but I know that it's based on a lot of historical fact.
Yeah, historical fiction.
Yeah, and I really came to appreciate more what the people went through during the war that lived in those countries. And man, how they suffered to come through that, and how they fought, underground to help the Allies, and the risk they put themselves at, and how they suffered, and lots of them died because they tried to help out. That book, to me, that is the best book I think I have ever read.
Speaking of piano, what's your favorite? Would it be piece, work? What is the one piano song?
Well, I guess over the years I've had lots. There was one when I was doing about grade 8 piano called Introduction and Fugue, and that was one of my favorite songs that I did. I won some awards with that. But recently, that song called The Prayer, Celine Dion sings it. That's one of my favorite songs. In fact, the seniors group that I play for at the Legacy Center, we just did that this last year in our program.
How about the biggest advancement you've seen in your lifetime so far? So that could be color TV, or man on the moon, or cell phone, internet, JFK. I'm just spitballing here, but you tell me.
Well, the fact that you brought up the man on the moon, I have to tell you a bit of trivia, because the day that we got engaged was the day before they landed on the moon for the first time.
Really?
It was the same weekend, and so we used to joke that I had a moon rock. But I really think that the internet technology is just amazing. 30 years ago, Obviously there were some sorts of computers then, but I can't believe the way that they have developed and just keep getting better and better. When I was a teenager, the only thing we had was the phone on the wall, and with about a 2-foot cord, and you didn't go any further than 2 feet away from the phone because that's as long as the cord was. And you didn't phone long distance. That's another thing. You didn't phone long distance those days unless it was really important or, an emergency, because it was expensive to phone long distance. Like my grandmother came out from England when she was in her 30s, and she lived to be 83, and she never ever got to talk again to her mother or father. And she only once had a phone call with her one sister, and that was because my dad organized it. And they hadn't talked to each other for about 40 years. And when they heard each other's voices, they couldn't talk anyway. They just cried through the whole thing.
Imagine that. And now,
Yeah.
if you want to talk to somebody on the opposite side of the earth, it's as simple as
Yeah.
a quick Zoom meeting.
Yeah. Yeah.
What do you think, if you were to say, is your biggest accomplishment so far?
Well, I guess raising our kids was probably the biggest accomplishment.
That's not a bad answer.
We didn't do a perfect job by any means, but they're 3 great guys, and we love them dearly, and they've got great families, and they're all good guys. But other than that, I suppose my books is what I really have got a lot of reward out of, not financial, but satisfaction out of. I love doing that. I love writing.
2 more. Biggest world event that ever happened. And are we living in it?
Oh, I guess we are. I think we are living in it. When you first said that, like a big world event, the first thing that pops to my mind is John Kennedy, JFK being shot.
That was a big day.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously it was a big day, but
I remember that. I'd come with my girlfriend to her place for lunch. And when we got there, her mom told us that JFK had been shot, and he wasn't dead yet, but while we were having our lunch, they pronounced him dead. And I guess the other one is when Princess Diana was killed.
The car crash.
Yeah.
Okay, your final one, a fun one. If you could take a time machine and go anywhere, where would you go?
Oh. Boy. I would, I think I would go back to when I was 6, 7 years old, 8 years old, summers out at Sandy Beach. They were just awesome. There was just, I'm sure there was lots of stress in the world, and maybe stress to my parents, but I sure didn't have any stress. You just got up every morning and went down to the beach and hung out with your friends, and we just had it was just a wonderful place with a sense of community and lots of friends. And, Mom had her friends that she would meet on the beach, and Dad drove back and forth to work every day. And yeah, that would be the time I would like to go back to.
Well, we'll leave it there. I've really enjoyed this. I hope you have as well.
I've really enjoyed it, Sean.
Well, I appreciate you sitting down. I've kept you now for a little over 2 hours. So I appreciate you doing this again, and just thanks.
Thank you, Sean. It's been enjoyable. I've enjoyed it.
Hey folks, thanks again for joining us today. If you just stumble on the show and like what you hear, please click subscribe. Remember, every Monday and Wednesday, a new guest will be sitting down to share their story. The Sean Newman Podcast is available for free on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, and wherever else you find your podcast fix. Until next time. Welcome to the podcast. Gotta love that I'm posting this at the end of every episode now. Welcome to the podcast, folks. Hope and read them. Be honest. You were hoping for a couple more slips. I aced it today. No F-bombs, no earmuffs. Enjoy your Wednesday, folks, or whenever you get to this episode. Enjoy the day, and we'll catch you next episode. Make sure you tune in at the end if you want to hear me slip up more than once, I'm sure, in the future. All right, I'm off.